when we get on the phone. And I know Brett just launched an awesome course that I'm sure he's going to talk about that is now closed, but I think there's been a lot of excitement about it. We just got done with the IYCA Summit this past weekend, where there was also a lot of talk about career development. So, we just kind of thought that it would be a good time to jump on here for, I don't know if we're going to go 30, 40 minutes or something, and kind of share our conversations that we've had about career development in the profession. And then you can talk a little bit about what's in your course for when it opens up again down the road, so people at least have an idea. And I'll make sure to spread that word to everybody that's on here and to the whole IYCA community when your course reopens. But I know you wanted to talk a little bit first about some of the information you've been all about lately. So do you want to start with some of that, Brett?
Yeah, I mean, in regards to anything that I'm doing now, a lot of it has evolved. For 8+ years, I spoke predominantly on training and still do. A lot of what I speak on is a mix. It's not uncommon for me to go to a conference and do one talk on social psychology related issues, coaching science related issues, and then the training side. But what we found across the board is that, you really look at the training piece, and even though it's really critical to what we do, it's probably about 50% of our job, right? It's the bare minimum somebody needs to be familiar with in order to be a strength coach, right? It's kind of this, if you're a strength and conditioning coach, especially if you've been in the game for a little bit, and you're not already familiar with some base levels of programming, you're not already familiar with some aspects of movement. And I don't mean like you've already filled your bucket and there's nothing more to learn, but I mean, people just need to understand that's the right to play, in this game, is to understand these kinds of aspects. But we've forgotten a lot of the other parts of what it means to be a coach, and the social science in particular. So a lot of my doctorate is focused on social influence, the coaching science side of things, how to use those things ethically to change behavior. And you look at some of the other things that coaches struggle with. 2 years ago, I hired a third-party research firm to reach out to coaches in the private sector, collegiate setting, tactical setting, every major setting there is. And we wanted to find out what coaches were really struggling with. And the vast majority of them were struggling with things like professional burnout. The vast majority of them were struggling with financial issues. The vast majority of them were struggling with this idea that says, hey, I know I didn't get into this job for me, but I'm really having trouble taking care of my base, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so it was a really overwhelming voice. And the majority of them just said, I also feel like if I do talk out about these things, that I'm going to be outcasted, that I'm going to be perceived as selfish, self-righteous, that it's going to be something where people are going to think I'm in it for the money. And so, the overwhelming kind of data showed that coaches struggle in silence. And so we wanted to put together a career development resource that really looked at the psychology of that, really looked at all the other aspects and intangibles that play a role. And we went down a fairly big rabbit hole. We had an event here in Atlanta. We talked about 50 years worth of burnout research, some of which I'll share with you guys today. We talked about the psychology of perception. What is perception really? And how can coaches market themselves in an ethical way, not so they can stand out just so they can get attention and likes or what have you, but more so that they can get the job that they want or create it, and really have a viable future. Because at the end of the day, it's just like they tell you on an airline, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. That give a good synopsis there?
Yeah, that's a great synopsis. And I know you want to share, some of the research that you found. So why don't you start there? Because I've got a bunch of questions that I do, and just to get your thoughts on certain things. But I kind of want to hear, some of the results from the research firm that did that survey for you.
Yeah, well, so you want to hear about the research in general, or do you want to see the like kind of the pieces on burnout? Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with, the burnout stuff kind of is from the research, correct?
Yeah, the research. So this was a survey, right? And so we can pull up the surveys that really kind of show. Give me one moment, because I was getting ready to show the parts of the course here. But I'll pull up some of the research. Let's see. Let's keep talking. We'll take questions while we're waiting for this to come.
I was going to ask you, while you're pulling that up, was the research conducted mainly on like college coaches, or was it Was
Nope.
it private
No,
coaching?
no. Like I said earlier, so it went out to my entire mailing list, and it also went out on Instagram. In total, we did 2 to 3 of these customer kind of surveys, because that's really what we were looking at doing, is people that were currently kind of following me or anything like that. We want to know how we could serve them better. So it's team, private sector, Olympic, high school, college. We had survey responses. I mean, put it this way, Jim, to put it in perspective, more people responded to this survey in totality than somebody came off a mute here, than people that built the Brooklyn Bridge. So when you look at kind of these things and you look across the board at what folks were kind of struggling with, you find that it was really united, like what was going on. So I'm going to share a little bit of this. Let's see here. Got to get back.
And also, while you're doing that, everybody that's on here, can you guys just run your cursor over the video screen, and on the bottom left, there's going to be a thing that says, it has a little icon for your microphone. Can you just mute yourselves? Because otherwise the sound comes up and it sounds really weird. So just go ahead and mute yourself. That'll help. And then, like Brett said, if you've got something to ask, just put that over in the chat area.
Yeah, and give me 1 second here. Of course, this thing is blocking this. All right, let's see here. All right, we're doing a screen share. I'll get this out of the way in a minute. Sorry, like I said, we were looking at, so this was one of our first surveys that we did 2 years ago. This one was 1,000 responses, and then we went deeper from here. Did a combination of in-depth interviews as well. A lot of research that kind of dives into that, and we wanted to see kind of who was the avatar. And so just within this one being, 1,000 surveys, we saw that average age was around 30.8 with a median age of 28. The majority of which, as you would imagine, strength and conditioning coaches, personal trainers, 40% team setting, college, university settings of different kinds, school, pro, team, and then the other ones we did tactical, high school, and then 60% were private facility owners, around 320. Again, this one specifically was 1,000 people out of the demographic. And what you're seeing in this word cloud is it gave you an idea of the words that were most commonly used in terms of them describing the setting that they worked in. So the bigger the word, the more bold the word, the more predominantly that tended to show up. So you can see, a lot of them, the private setting, performance, people that work in different schools, facility, athlete. Very few of them were club, right? You can see club right there. Very few were in the club side of things. There weren't a ton of personal trainers. And it's also something where it wasn't just predominantly football. A lot of people tend to think that. And so this word cloud is a really effective way to get an idea and take the demographic and say, okay, without making the findings of this super confusing, what are the things that we see come up the most commonly? And then again, we dove deeper via phone interviews. I stayed out of those phone interviews. Again, we wanted it as unbiased as possible. So that's why I hired the firm. But lack of pay, job insecurity, a lot of people just feel like there's this constant need to grind, to feel validated, and gives you a clear idea there. The common trend here, Jim. Yeah. So we look into this as well. And, going into, hold on, I'm going to take a look and see what's going on with the audio here, because we're going to have to, guys, if you could jump on, make sure and mute yourself. We're getting a lot of ambient noise, and it's going to be tough for me to go through this and talk you through it, as well as mute everybody. So please, if you know somebody that's making the noise, tell them to shut up. All right. So going back into this, really a lot of people just feel like they're not making enough money and don't have the opportunities to be able to get out of these situations where they're so, it's no surprise. Hold on, Jim. We're going to what's going on here.
I think you might have to go through them.
Yeah, I'd have to go through individually. So when we start to get a little bit more specific, we look at the validation issue. And, coaches just really feel like others don't see the value they contribute. We have this field that's gone through a lot of schooling. We've all paid a lot of money. I know I did 2 unpaid internships, and then I had a graduate assistantship where I made $10,000, which was basically an apartment, and pay the groceries and everything. And you can see we've taken the name out for obvious reasons, but people feel like I'm not appreciated or validated. I've been told I'm not in the game long enough to even voice my opinion. There's a constant lack of communication amongst strength and conditioning coaches. Other folks, another gentleman said, the pro basketball environment, the importance of a good S&C is uncertain, meaning there's just not a lot of people that feel like they make the difference, right? And we could have all the data that we want with sports science, but a big part of my talks about the psychology of perception. So how is it we can have very clear data of the outcomes, the objective outcomes we're providing, and then people still don't understand what strength coaches do? And this is why it's a little bit of a farce, Jim, when people say, well, you know what, if we just had a governing body that would be able to rank us and score us and give us a rating, or, but you know what, if sport coaches, had to really take strength and conditioning or sports science related curriculum, this would be more obvious. But what the perception literature shows that we go over and valued is that even if things are right in front of somebody's face, take smoking, for example. We knew smoking caused cancer. We still do. But does everybody quit smoking just because we know and we have data that shows it causes cancer?
Nope.
Not at all. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, people sometimes people will do it in spite of that. And so what we really wanted to find, and this was a really powerful one we got from a phone interview as well.
Right. Let me stop you for just a second, because I'm sure it's just really annoying to people. Somebody on the chat said you can go in and click under participants. There's a mute all button.
Okay, let me stop this screen share here, because that's it's going to let me get back here. As you can see, my desktop is a nightmare.
You're fine. I mean, almost everybody's muted. There's only a couple that aren't, so you could also go through it.
Yep, no problem. Yep, just give me a moment. So anyway, while we're doing this, let's just keep talking about the common issue is, being able to, what you're seeing is a recurring theme. Let's see, mute all. If somebody, where did they say it was, Jim?
No, like teas and coffees and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I hear you guys saying that I should be able to mute all. The issue is finding out where to do that. So,
or maybe if you click on participants, you can probably just go over their little thing. Click. There's only like 3 or 4 that aren't muted. I think there's Declan is not muted. Andrea is not muted.
Kids up there with them. Well, yeah, so
it's always interesting to me that people can't tell when they're muted or not. You know what I mean? I'm just like, how do you not know? All right, guys, while I'm doing this, let's go ahead and keep the conversation going. I'll get this taken care of. We're going through it, but let's keep the conversation going. So, Jim, does that give you a clear idea of kind of what we're looking at and what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've been in this profession for a real long time, and I've seen people come and go, and it's I think it's been pretty obvious just from conversations with my friends and people that I know that there's quite a lack of security. I know a ton of people that aren't sure what's going on, and they lose their job. They go all over the place. They have to travel. And so I think that the research that you did, this study, probably, it kind of encapsulated all of that and really showed that, that in a valid or in a substantial way. And there you go. I think you did.
Yeah, I finally found it. So. Nice. I had gone through one by one, but anyway, we got that cleared up. Sorry about that, everybody. And some of that just comes down to a lack of self-awareness. When you're on these calls, you think that people would realize that. But anyway, Jim, keep going.
So, these are all just personal conversations that I've had. And when I go to clinics and when we talk and when we have business meetings and business training, it doesn't matter if you're a college coach, if you are a professional coach, if you are in a private facility, if you own your own facility, like we see that this is a hard job and a hard industry to make it in, and a really hard industry to make it in long term. But I'm not sure that it has to be. And kind of what you've done is you've gone out there and tried to figure out, okay, let's first of all, let's see, like, is this really a problem, or is it just the people I'm talking to? And pretty clear that you found that this is a pervasive problem. And then you started working on the thought of, well, does it have to be? Because for a long time, I've told a lot of students when I go and talk, at colleges, like, hey, look around the room. You're going to be competing against all these people, and probably 80% of them will be out of this profession within 2 years.
Yeah.
They don't like that, but the professors, you can see it every time I say it, the instructors like look around like, yep, I've been trying to tell you this. But I don't know that colleges are really preparing people for the rigors that, and the ups and downs that they're going to go through. They're more just teaching them the academic stuff, the nuts and bolts, but not how to run a business, not how to have a career, not how to get a job, not how to keep a job, how to maintain relationships, how to increase your value so that you basically can't be fired because you're so valuable. So the stuff that you're talking about really seemed to like take all the things that maybe I've been seeing as I talk to all these people and bring it down into actual numbers. So for me, it was really cool to see that you did that. And it looks like you've got a little graphic to kind of encapsulate that.
Yeah, well, and some of this are the slides that we presented at the 2-day event in Atlanta. I mean, here's the crazy thing, Jim, is when we announced that we're doing something that's career development focused, we're going to talk about these things, right? Like how to stand out for the right reasons, how to really just provide a safety net for you and your family, how to periodize your career, right? That's really what this is people will periodize their programs all day long. Nobody periodizes their career. And again, the amount of responses, we were going to keep it to 15 people because we wanted this small kind of coterie of individuals that were absolutely serious about interacting. Because it's not anything that I host. I mean, again, with my doctoral work and the focus of art of coaching being skilled interpersonal communication, the social sciences involved with coaching, we don't want people just coming in mouth breathing and looking at a bunch of slides. We did a lot of breakouts. We did a lot of things like that. But when we looked at that, the number of emails we got of people being like, hey, literally one guy goes, I want to come, but I'm not sure that it's right for me I feel selfish, spending money on something that helps me, quote unquote, get ahead. And I almost just said, explain that mindset to me. You go to a clinic or a conference on speed development or agility or strength and conditioning to get information that makes you sharper at what you do so that you can stay relevant, stay ahead, stay informed. Why is it so wrong that you do this here? And so we see it's multifactorial. Like you mentioned, Jim, we have a lack of education in career management. We have a lack of education in financial management. We have a lot of people that get into the field for the wrong reasons. So many of them just love working out, or they want to be around athletes, or, any number of things. They follow their passion, which really isn't good advice. You need to follow a purpose, not a passion. Then we have that martyrdom complex. I'm proud of being humble. So this is where, and we get into this later in the course, the science of what's called impression management. But a lot of strength and conditioning coaches really will say, oh, I'm the hardest working guy in the room. I don't do it for the money. It's not about this. And really, what they don't know that they're using is they're using a marketing tactic called an exemplification technique, where you're trying to, you're really trying to espouse and showcase your moral virtue, right? Saying, I don't do it for the money and all this stuff is well-intentioned. But a lot of that kind of behavior really started in the education setting. And there's research to support this, where substitute teachers who were trying to get jobs were trying to find kind of different ways that they could, showcase themselves as kind of a true blue, right? When they were trying to distinguish themselves from the competition. You see this happen a lot in any field where there's scarce resources. People feel like, oh, if I can just kind of show them that, like, I'll do this and I'll sacrifice time here and that I'm the hardest worker, I'll get the job. But here's the issue, Jim. That's not sustainable. When all of a sudden you're wondering why you're getting paid the same amount 5 years in a row, or you haven't gotten a raise, or you haven't gotten a promotion, and now you have a family to take care of. Well, who can you really be mad at when you've essentially told the power brokers, the people that are paying you, that it's not about the money for you? And like, what other field does that so proudly? I don't think I've ever gone to my dentist and heard him say, I don't do this for the money. You know what I mean? Like, nobody states that so openly. So, it's humorous that we're such a humble profession, yet, you'll see people go to all these lengths to really kind of like, verbally and non-verbally try to showcase their superiority. Then there's the perception of the strength coach, because we haven't really learned about ethical, and I emphasize that, ethical marketing and the psychology of perception. The way we brand ourselves is really a joke. And, branding is not what most people think. People think branding is Instagram or having a website. Branding is a communication tactic. Marketing is a communication tactic that states, this is who I am. These are my values. This is what I believe in. I mean, when you look at the term personal branding, it originated around 1997 with a guy named Tom Peters, who, once that book came out by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and, in the 90s was the big self-improvement movement. All these different books came out that were giving people different skills. Well, what they didn't have is a way to communicate these new skill sets to employers. People didn't know how to say, hey, I've got all these new skills. I've been doing a lot of self-development. This is what I do. And so personal branding was mentioned for the first time as a term in the magazine Fast Company. It had nothing to do with, you getting followers or you doing this or you, it's just like fire or physics, right? When you look at marketing, it's not inherently bad. It's how you wield that. Not to get grotesque, but hammers have built a lot of homes for people without them. And hammers have also been used as a weapon to harden people. And so when people think, oh, I don't want to market myself or I don't want to brand yourself, the reality is if you don't, and you don't understand that side of things today, you're going to be behind. And there is an ethical way to do that. Just showcase who you really are. I mean, that's the great thing about social media is it serves as a timestamp. If you scroll back all the way to the beginning of where I used Instagram, I'm still posting the exact same things I did then. Just simple stuff. I'm not showing a bunch of shirtless selfies and people doing a bunch of nonsense, because you've got to figure out from a self-awareness standpoint what you're really trying to communicate. And then the naivete and fear that you see here, Jim, that's really just coaches thinking that somebody's going to come do this for them. Oh, the governing body, it's their job. Even on Instagram, I did a survey in which 2,800 people responded to just a little, yes, no kind of thing. And I said, whose job is it to, help you with your career? And the first thing that they could choose was my own, like I'm in charge of taking control of this, or the governing body. And it's scary, Jim. I think 73% said it's my own job and the rest said it's the governing body. Now, even though that's skewed in the right direction, because it is absolutely our own, it concerned me that over 20% of coaches still really think it's somebody else's job to do this stuff for them. Like, when is reactivity like that? When is reliance a good strategy? So, another thing we get into that, and this has to do with my doctorate, is why don't people change? Well, it's hard, and when you look at the research here, back in the 1950s, the grandfather of behavior change, a gentleman by the name of Kurt Lewin, really, he's behavior change's Yuri Verkhoshansky, if you want to think of an analog there. He said that change can really be divided into 3 phases, and it was called the change is 3 steps model. Some people will call it the force field model. But the first one is this unfreezing phase. And this is the phase where people recognize that there's an issue, such as we have, right? Like, strength coaches are burning out. There's a lot of really good coaches that aren't able to stay in the field. I know at 28, I started experiencing symptoms of burnout. It just felt like, every day was Groundhog Day. Like, I was coaching 6, 7, 8 groups a day. It was the same thing. And then you'd get them better, they'd leave, a new group would come in. You'd get them better, they'd leave, a new group came in. And, just things felt off. But, this unfreezing phase we're in right now is where's strength and conditioning's way forward? Like, we're just supposed to sit here and wait and not have any solutions. Then you go through the changing phase. This is where people now start to look at the available options. And this is really where my course Valued that just closed, this is where this sits. Because I looked around as a strength and conditioning coach when I went on my own, and I said, where is there a career development and management resource that is not only like spans whether I'm trying to get the job, keep my current job, advance within the job, or even, just secure the future? Because our buddy Ron McKeefrey talks about this a lot. So, and Mike Boyle did the other day too. So many coaches are getting into their 50s and 60s and realizing they don't really have a retirement plan. That, not many, like he said, when's the last time you heard a strength coach throwing a retirement party? It just doesn't happen. And so when you look at that changing phase, you have to take stock of, okay, I know there's a problem. I've admitted that. what are my options? And I didn't see any for strength and conditioning coaches at these courses. So we created Valued, and then I'm not arrogant enough to think that anybody wants my career choice. You know, my wife and I, we decided we wanted option value. We actually wanted to create what we did in retirement first. That way we're not reliant on other people for income. And so now I can coach, I can teach, I can speak, I can do these things. And if a good opportunity comes, cool, we'll assess that. And in the past 5 years, there have been opportunities to go back to the team side, but none of them fit our values, right? So we're able to choose, well, does it make sense? Is this something we want to subject our children to? Are these the things that we want to do? So now Valued sits within that changing phase as the first resource in totality to keep people these options. And we got Andrea Hootie from University of Kansas in it, Andy McCloy, who's owned his own facility for 20 years. We've got Ron, we've got Donnell Boucher. So because we know that there's coaches in the team setting that are going to relate more on that side, the private setting that are going to relate more on that side. Finally is the refreezing phase. This is where somebody says, all right, I know there's a problem. I know there's options. I've got to decide with one and I've got to move forward, right? This is very similar to what we do with program design as well. We can argue about linear, conjugate, undulating, but at some point, you're going to have to choose an approach and see it through for that 2 to 6 week cycle or beyond, right? Like if you start mixing and matching within that cycle, it gets really ugly. You've got to choose an option and stick with it. And this is when somebody really, really decides that they want to change. So if we look at this, what the literature shows, and this is from a 2010 article, is all 3 phases are necessary for change to have the best chance at sticking. You know, we can't move directly to changing without the unfreezing phase. People can't just decide they're going to jump into something without weighing their options and their values. And then a big part of it, Jim, is also a person reacts to change dependent on their confidence level and dealing with change successfully in the first place, right? And that was something that I've told you when I wrote Conscious Coaching, I was dead out. I was pretty much broke. I mean, we had some money in the bank account, but it took around $25,000 to get the book going, and I didn't have that. So that was a loan. At the same time, we had just stepped out on our own. At the same time, we were looking to move to Atlanta, and we had no idea. You know, I didn't have any athletes that had ever trained with me on this side of the country because since I've been a strength and conditioning coach, I basically lived in Southern Illinois, Phoenix, Nebraska, or LA. You know, so when I came out here, who knows who's going to stay loyal to you? And that's a big piece. So, but my wife and I are very confident in our ability to adapt with things. So we just said, hey, you know what? I was 29, 30 years old. If we're going to fail, let's do this now. But what the research shows is really, you know, if you're going to change, it comes down to a matter of self-confidence, your risk tolerance. And I have a whole YouTube video on this as well. Your openness to new experiences. But it's definitely not a result of ignorance or inflexibility. It just has to go with a lot of aspects of self-determination. So this is a big part of what I shared on YouTube recently. If anybody follows me on there, is the 5 reasons people tend to reject change, right? And I'm not going to go through it all in totality here because there's a video on it and the course goes in depth, but basically it boils down to opinion, vision, suppression, perception, or suspicion. So I don't believe the change is necessary, which almost no strength coach is going to think that if they've been in the game 3 or more years. I don't believe it can be implemented, or I don't believe I have the skills to see it through. Suppression we see as a big thing in strength and conditioning. So some people keep change from happening. These are people that have these jobs that don't want to see a lot of change. And so they hire their buddies, or they only hire people they know. They're not always hiring the most qualified people. They're just kind of keeping it in the family, so to speak. Now, this could also be somebody that is in a job that even though they're really unhappy, the job maybe pays really well. Or maybe the job, gives them access to a company vehicle or any number of things. And so they don't want to change. They don't, because it's like, I know I'm unhappy, but I got it good here to a degree. And I don't want to give anybody else these resources. Another big one for S&C is the proposed change seems to be inconsistent with values. And this goes to people that think it's selfish to look out for themselves. And then finally, suspicion. So anytime a leader who proposes a change and that leader is not trusted or they don't have buy-in, that's going to magnify these other things. And that kind of leads into the burnout section, which we're not going to go into a ton, because again, this is probably, I think, 138 slides in and of itself, but I am going to touch on some key points. What 50 years of burnout research is teaching us. And keep in mind, The field of strength and conditioning has only been around for about 60, and unless you're one of those people that is going to try to say, well, the Greeks were throwing med balls. Yeah, that wasn't a formal field or vocation of strength and conditioning. So it's really been around for about 60 years. And what they find in the literature is burnout has nothing to do with mental toughness. It has nothing to do with not being committed. It is one of the hallmark afflictions of the most dedicated. And it's the bedrock of anything that has to do with stress, anxiety, and even depression. What they find is that even though at first it was derided as kind of this non-scholarly pop psychology, it shows that while its roots were in healthcare, it affects a lot of people in military, the medical field, public service type positions, educators and teachers of all kind. And all of it really just touches on the fact that this is a psychological syndrome. It is a medically recognized psychological syndrome developed in response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors. And so you look at this, and we built out a whole internal and external load monitoring piece that helps people assess their workplace, their situation, how likely they are to burn out, all these kinds of things. All that's downloadable with the course. But I want to get into these three. These are the three main dimensions, and then we'll talk about these a little bit, Jim. The three main dimensions of burnout, the first of which is emotional exhaustion. This refers to feelings of being overextended and depleted. And I'll be honest, man, I even felt this to a point last year because I wrote Conscious Coaching 2 years ago. I've been speaking on it ever since. Then we did a more in-depth course, Bought In, which was all the research I learned after Conscious Coaching. And then I did this. I was trying to answer every DM, every tweet, every email for people that reached out. And I remember it was starting to chip away at me because it felt like I have all these resources I put out, yet people keep asking me the same questions, and some of them don't check out the resources. And we all know that person. It's the person that's like, hey, they slide into your DMs and they're like, can you tell me what I can do with my career? And you're like, dude, this isn't like, you're asking me this over DM. Like, I don't know you. There's so much context here that needs to be filled in. Like, here's a resource for you. And then they're like, they'll email me a month later and they'll say, hey, the same question. I'm like, awesome, man. Like, I want to help, but did you review that resource? It gives us some background. No, I couldn't. And what I started realizing is I was getting burnt out because I was helping people, Jim, that didn't want to help themselves. They just want a quick answer. It's kind of like last night, I filmed a 90-minute webinar on program design basics because I just get hammered with that question so much. And I know I'll put it out, and then there's still going to be a third of the people that will never watch it, but they expect me to answer their questions over social media. And every coach can relate to this to some degree. So, even last year I felt, like emotionally overextended because it was like, I'm trying to help. I flew 100,000 miles, have built these courses and books, but people have to want to help themselves. Cynicism and detachment is the next one. And this one represents the interpersonal dimension of burnout. So this is kind of that onset of negative, callous, or easily detached responses. This is when people kind of like just kind of go through the motions. The research refers to it as cognitive distancing, indifference, just kind of like that person that's showing up and they're kind of salty and you can kind of tell like they're just not all in. And then finally is inefficacy. And this one is a critical one for strength and conditioning coaches as well. It represents the self-evaluation part of it. We feel incompetent. Did we really make the difference we thought we did? Is anybody even noticing? Not that we want somebody to put a parade out there for us, but nurses deal with this a lot. They'll care for a patient, they'll give it their best, and sometimes that patient dies or they get worse. And that's why the medical field, doctors and nurses experience absolutely dangerous levels of burnout, which then leads to depression. And so, we're going to get into, I'll show you this real quick as we go through it. Here are some of the manifestations of it. And I'm just going to shut up for a minute so everybody on the call can kind of just read this, and then I'll stop the share and we'll get back to the discussion. So you can see from an emotional, a physical, and work-related standpoint, there are a lot of little things here that, it's not that one of them gets you. It's this quote, it's not the mountains ahead that you climb that wear you out, but the pebbles in your shoe. So for me, it's not the trip I have to take to Beijing before I come back and coach my NFL guys, before I go somewhere else, before I film a course, before I do this. It's all the little things in between. It's trying to get back to every email. It's trying to get back to this. It's feeling like I never help enough people. Sometimes it's, I've been on the road forever and, maybe I didn't get as many training sessions as I want. It's all these little things that build up that start to just erode away at your effectiveness. So listen, this is 1/24th really of the online course. And it's just the intro. And it was 2 days. I think we did 12 hours total of footage of small group breakouts. And what was awesome, man, is just seeing a bunch of people speak out on it for the first time. And once they started to learn the research and they're like, oh, I thought burnout was something that happened to people that weren't grateful, or, I thought burnout was this. It really happens to military and surgeons. Like, we're not alone. Firefighters are tremendous. And so, the first half of the course really deals with the psychology of the issue, right? Like, what are the underpinnings of what's going on? And then the rest of it is like, great, what the hell can we do about it? So that gives you a little bit of a synopsis, hopefully.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, we're only going to talk for a couple more minutes, but like, I think a lot of people just feel like, well, if I get burned out, then my only option is I got to quit. I got to get out. I can't change this. From everything that you've done, have you found that there are other options? Like, do you have to just get out, or can you make a change?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, you can make a change. So what they actually find, and I'm opening up some of the course right now, what they find, the things that do not help with burnout really are things like, and this kind of gives you guys an interface of the course. So, it kind of goes through the intro, the problem, the different tabs, and then we have the videos of the actual presentation. You guys get all the slides, and then you also get a Cliff's Notes version, all those kinds of things. So how do we handle it? We provide a model, and you're seeing a little of it here. What I developed in conjunction with the folks that really spearheaded this, I went through all this research and I thought, what could we develop? What wouldn't work? And so what myself and a good friend kind of went through, and we talked to some of the people that did this research, and they loved the idea, is we created what was called the FIRE model, right? And the FIRE model is really about, all right, what are some steps we can take that can help us do this? And I don't know that we'll have time to get through a whole lot of this right now, but one of the big things that they said that you want to make sure and do is you need to understand that, just taking vacation isn't going to change things. Like getting it, because that's what people do. They'll do mental resilience training, mindfulness work, vacations. And what they find is really what it comes down to is fit. You have got to really assess your values, because at the end of the day, there's 6 predictors of burnout. One is workload. And that doesn't just have to deal with like the amount on your plate. It has to do like, do you feel like it's relevant? Is it stuff that you enjoy tackling? There's also the reward part of it. And what's fascinating is the reward part of it has less to do with the financial piece and more to do with social rewards. So am I seen as a true coach? Am I respected by my peers? Am I acknowledged as one of the best in the field, or at least at what I do? Do people know that I care? All these little things. So you look at workload, you look at values, you look at the fit within the job, you look at their emotional responses. And they say that you've just got to go through these 6 predictors, and you've got to go through this filter. And that's why we designed this whole, sheet within the course of people can check these boxes, and it's a Likert scale. And it will give them an idea of where they sit on this burnout spectrum, and it's not so much like, am I burnout or am I not? But are you headed on that path? Is this something that's really sustainable? And this is why we go back to people not understanding their values. A lot of people will say like, I'm in this job for this reason, I care and whatever. Well, that's great, but why'd you take this position? I talked to somebody the other day that they took a minor league strength and conditioning role in baseball, and it required that they had a master's degree and were bilingual, and it's paying them $28,000 a year. And I said, well, why'd you take that? He goes, I'll be honest, man. Like, I want the affiliation with being involved with, Major League Baseball or the subsidiaries. Like, I feel like it'll be a good thing for my resume. That's fine. And it's sound thinking, but he had already done stuff like this twice in his past. So now the guy's in his early 30s, having taken 2 jobs that pay anywhere from 28 to 35, got his master's degrees, bilingual. And at some point it's like, listen, dude, you've got to find an alternative strategy. And that's kind of what the rest of it gets into. It touches on, well, how do I negotiate? well, how do I deal with this? How do I even avoid signing a bad contract? You ever heard of anybody, Jim, that athlete, strength coach or otherwise has signed a really bad work contract where they didn't realize it, but everything they did, everything they created, almost everything was owned, and it left them with limited flexibility?
Oh yeah.
100%. And so then on top of that, like even for people that are like, I am screwed, I'm locked in, I can't do any of this stuff right now. We talk about different ways that you can leverage your network. And then we brought in my father, who was a financial advisor for 40 years, licensed, and he gave investing tips. Even if you have $5, what can you do? So even if you are stuck, how can you at least financially on the back end take care of yourself so you're not reliant on that job over the long term? And it's like a dummies guide. What is an IRA? What is a 401k? How do I handle this? What is bad debt versus good debt? So we really tried to take the excuses out of anybody's mouth, because I've had plenty of them too before I knew any of this stuff of, well, I don't know, and I can't do this. Here's the last thing I'll end on though, Jim. We had one person that said, hey, I can't attend the course. It looks like it deals with a lot of things that I'm having issues with, but I just feel like my professional life needs to take priority, or my personal life needs to take priority over my professional life. And I said, brother, they're inextricably linked. We don't get balance in our field. Perfect balance doesn't exist. Now seasons do, right? Just like there's in season and off season, there's volumes and intensities in different aspects of our lives, just like our programs we got to be mindful of. But the guy didn't realize that and he said it later because he ended up taking valued, but he was like, I guess I didn't see the tie-in, everything that's going on in my professional life is what's screwing up things at home. I'm angry, I'm tired, I'm irritable, and I'm taking it out on my significant other because I'm not paying attention to this stuff. So I know that's super long-winded, but that's a huge piece of that. And hopefully it gives people, again, 1/24 of what I tried to put together in this resource.
So the resource, the actual course is closed for right now, but people should go to valuedcourse.com and they can get on the list and they can get a free taste of it, and then they'll get updates periodically, and you'll let them know when it's coming back, right?
Yeah, and just so people aren't confused on this, like when course is closed, this isn't something that we fake. This is something that on the back end, and I wouldn't have known this until I started building courses, but like this is on the back end, it takes a lot of work. You'd be surprised. You get 90 people that say, hey, I forgot my password. Or you get 10 people that gave a bad credit card number. And then, so I have to hire people, on the back end, which, listen, like I don't make a ton of money. Like I'm 33 years old. I'm not sitting on Mount Olympus here. Like we have a kid coming, but we've got to hire support every time these things go through. And we try to answer questions of people, and so this isn't like, hey, the course is closed, I'm trying to trick you into something. We really have to do this because we want people that are serious. We want them to go into it, give us feedback. If something sucks, we want to make it better for the next demographic, right? We have all taken shitty courses. I can't imagine, like the amount of money I spent on stuff when I was younger that was like 5 ways to improve this, 10 ways to improve that. And it was all horse shit, pardon my language. Like there's so much crap out there that we want people to continually help us make that better. So you can go to artofcoaching.com. I mean, that's a central hub for anything that I do now is artofcoaching.com. There's a million free resources on there. If you follow the podcast, when and if we do a second launch of the course, it'll be on there. But the first thing is always my newsletter. And I very rarely send out a ton. You can ask anybody. There's some people on here that are on the newsletter. I mean, you can ask them. I don't send out something every day or every week. I'm not trying to bug anybody. But yeah, that's where they can go to get a download. I think it's like a 12-minute downloadable video of the course, some of which we just went over at valuedcourse.com. Yep.
All right. So, I mean, and we'll also announce it. We did it for you last time, and we'll make sure that we announce it to all the IYCA community so that they know it's coming. But in the meantime, this will be kind of the last thing, you don't have to answer it perfectly or too in depth. But if somebody is looking at those things and they looked at that list and they're like, whoa, like maybe I'm either burned out or I'm heading towards that. The course is closed. What else should they do just right now to kind of get themselves reset and get a little back on track until they can get back in the course.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, and I was going to try to pull it up. It might take a second, but the big thing is, and I know you guys see my screen right now, but I'm going to show you something. The big thing is you really do need to do an assessment of where you're at, why you're there, what the end game is for you. Like, have you really laid out how you're going to get there? And I'm not talking about a bullshit 5-year plan. You know, we don't live in a day and age where you get the luxury of a 5-year plan. Things switch, things change too soon. But if you at least don't know kind of what you're putting into action for the next 6 months and at least 12 months, you know, things like that, then that's a critical issue. So, you know, within the course, we give people this value checklist that says kind of like, what are the opportunities that are presented to me in my personal or professional life? Now, in an ideal circumstance, if these things are what I think they are, will these match up? And, you know, will this really lock and load with what we believe in? And I don't have a printout of it handy, or I'd show you, Jim. I don't want people to see me fumbling through my Google Drive to pull it out. Sorry that you got me with an unexpected question on that one, or I would have shown them the spreadsheet. But really being able to go down this checklist and assessing whether your current situation aligns with your values, or, and please listen to this, or whether you're really falling victim right now to the sunk cost fallacy. You're continuing on a certain path just because you put so much time into that path already, right? The failing restaurant that, oh, you've been going for a year and a half, and if you just pour more money into it, it might make it, you know. And this is kind of like if somebody's walking to the grocery store and it was a, you know, a 2-mile walk and they're 3/4 of the way there and they find out that it's closed. Some of them are like, well, shit, I'm almost there. Like, I've got to keep walking. And this is kind of just the fallacy. Most coaches feel like I've already been here, or I can't let people down and I can't do this. You have got to understand where you're falling victim to this sunk cost fallacy, where despite the fact that you are not getting the returns that you want out of it, and I'm not talking financial, I'm talking about returns in general, you have got to recognize that, and you've got to reevaluate your values. You know, you also need to speak up about this stuff, because here's the thing, a lot of shame in our community. There's a lot of shame in our community of people that feel like they're alone, and what we've seen is absolutely nobody is alone in this, but they are waiting for permission for older veteran strength coaches to talk about this as well. Because they feel like, you know, if they say anything, that it's these older veteran strength coaches that are really going to lay into them. And it's just time to rise up as a community. You know, another option is if you go to artofcoaching.com and you go to these, we have like something called the coalition we're starting. And the coalition is private mentoring and things that, you know, we're getting groups of people. We're finalizing this now. It'll be announced in the next couple of months, but groups of people that want to work on this in groups, you know, and small kind of guidance of saying, hey, here's where I'm at. This is what I'm dealing with, whether it's training related, coaching related, or career related. How can you help me? And we're trying to get like-minded people together to take action. What you cannot do is sit in silence and think that, again, the 40-second book on periodization that you buy is going to be the way that you're going to overcome this stuff. And somebody's going to be wowed because you can talk about transmutation and intensive and extensive loading, you know, learn that stuff. But, you know, at some point you've got to diversify your resources.
Well, I mean, you were talking about veteran coaches needing to step up and say something. I'm a veteran coach, and I have gone through this. And, you know, to see you put all the time and energy and your resources into trying to fix it, that means a lot, because I know it's affected me personally, and it's affected a lot of my friends. So I'm sure people really appreciate it, and just being able to talk about it and realize that, like you said, shame. And to me, shame is the feeling of like, what if people really knew about me? And I've woken up that way before. I've woken up thinking like, dang, what if my staff or my athletes know that I'm really tired and that I'm not in a good place right now? What would they think of me? Like, would I still be the same person? And what if they knew I was burned out? And what if they knew this and that? You know, like, yeah, that's a crappy feeling. And it's great that you're giving people a resource to kind of get out of that thinking, make them realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that you don't have to just quit and, you know, and move on to something else. So
no, man, I appreciate it, but it doesn't do any, what I found is it doesn't do any good without people uniting on this. You know, I mean, we have people that will drop $1,500 on, you know, a course on just Olympic lifting or what have you, which is fine, depending where you're at in your career. I've done that, you know, but like, they'll keep doing that. You know, in the meantime, this course, it costs people about $3 a day with the payment plan. That's a cup of coffee. and we still had people that were like, I don't know, like I just came back from a speed summit. And it's like, oh, great. How many of those have you been to now? And again, I'm not disparaging anybody on here that has those things. Like I still talk about training. I think everybody hopefully gets what I'm getting at. Diversify your resources. You know what I mean? Like it's like programming the same damn movement again and again and again. It's like knowing your push to pull ratio is way off, but being like, screw it, love me some bench press. You know what I mean? Like, and so
all my shoulders are killing me.
Yeah. It's just kind of, and like, there's no trick here, And so I just think that more coaches, you need to unite. If you hear anything from this, it's nobody's coming to save us. No organization is going to be like, hey, you know what? We want to make sure that you have a sustainable future. That like we can't even get organizations to, I'm not going to get into that, but I just think it's time for us to quit debating about dumb bullshit and trying to like prove our value by saying who's smarter than who and getting on Twitter and saying, look at this dipshit with his clean technique. And like, what does that do to move the needle? And so I'd say that's another thing too, like sit and assess your actions because nobody was more guilty than me. When I was a graduate assistant, I mean, I'd look at different videos that people would throw up, training videos. I'd be like, that's dumb. That's dumb. I could do better. My program's better. You're just an idiot. And like, it's like at the end of the day, none of that complaining and none of that posturing is going to do anything to move the needle. And that probably tells you whether you're in the field for the right reasons too. Are you doing it to move the needle or you just want everybody to know how smart you are? Because if it's the latter, there's other jobs you can do that.
Yeah. Well, hey, this is awesome. At the very least, I think this is getting people to open their eyes, to think about things in a little different way, to think about, what can I do right now? Can I get that assessment you're talking about? I'm going to go to Art of Coaching. I'm going to go make sure that I know when this course comes out again and be ready when all these things hit us. So
yeah,
dude, appreciate it, man.
No, likewise. Guys, in the meantime, if you want to hear more of this stuff, my Art of Coaching podcast, I've spent a lot of time the last few episodes talking to coaches, really great people like Tim Karen, Michael Silbernagel, a lot of different coaches about these kinds of things. We're trying to attack things that aren't commonly talked about on podcasts. So, if you do want to, anything from finding a mentor to, not feeling guilty about charging what you're worth and all these things, all mistakes that I had made and still continue to make, to be honest, go to the podcast. It's on every major platform. I'm trying to do the best I can to put stuff in the arena and help. So appreciate y'all. Jim, thanks for giving me the time and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Awesome, man.
All right. Bye.